The night felt too polished to be real, like one of those scenes you only see in movies where everyone pretends to be happy because someone's filming. My parents' house gleamed brighter than usual. The dining room smelled faintly of polished oak and rosemary chicken, and the chandelier above the table cast a warm, flattering glow on faces that didn't always deserve it. 25 people sat around that long mahogany table, relatives, family friends, colleagues of my father who wore expensive watches and laughter like armor. Everyone seemed to be performing some version of themselves, and I was no exception. I had dressed carefully, maybe too carefully, an emerald green blouse that brought out the gold in my eyes, simple earrings from my own collection, subtle makeup. I wanted to look composed, successful even, though my hands still bore traces of the silver dust from the pieces I polished that morning. I debated whether to wear one of my necklaces, but in the end, I didn't. Something in me didn't want to give them another reason to mock what I did. I wanted to be invisible that evening, to let Ethan have his moment, to make my parents proud of at least one of their children. Ethan sat at the head of the table beside his fiancée Claire. He looked effortlessly confident, the way people do when they fit perfectly into the world that's been prepared for them. Claire, elegant and understated, laughed softly at everything he said, her hand occasionally brushing his sleeve. My parents were radiant, hosting with the comfort of people who know they've succeeded in life. Every conversation around me revolved around business growth, property values, and wedding plans. My shop, my entire world, wasn't even a speck in their orbit. When my dad spoke, the room naturally quieted. He had that presence, an executive tone that commanded attention without demanding it. I'd grown up listening to that voice, learning to measure my words against the weight of his. As he stood with his glass of champagne, I could already sense the rhythm of his speech, a blend of pride, authority, and performance. He started talking about Ethan's engagement, how proud he was, how he'd always known his son would make good choices. He thanked everyone for coming, spoke about family values, legacy, success, the usual themes that wrapped our dinners like expensive packaging. I was smiling, nodding, pretending not to feel the familiar ache that came with being in his orbit, but never quite inside it. Then he turned toward me. And maybe one day, he said, pausing just long enough for the room to brace for a punchline, Jada's necklace Etsy thing will pay for her dinner here. The words hit harder than I expected. The laughter followed instantly, raucous, effortless, a wave that rolled over me before I could even breathe. Someone at the far end of the table snorted. Another joked, "You better give us a family discount when that day comes." I wanted to disappear. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth, trembling slightly. I felt the heat crawl up my neck. I tried to smile, but my jaw tightened instead. It wasn't the first time he'd belittled what I did, but it was the first time he'd done it publicly, as entertainment. The humiliation wasn't in the words themselves, it was in the way he said them, the way people laughed like they were all in on the same joke. Mom laughed too, though she tried to hide it behind a napkin. Her laughter was softer, apologetic, but it still stung. I caught her glance, half guilt, half embarrassment. I knew she didn't mean to hurt me, but silence is its own kind of betrayal. Everyone laughed, except Ethan. He was the only one who didn't, his jaw clenched, and his eyes flicked toward me, sharp with quiet anger. For a second, I thought he might actually say something, tell Dad to stop, defend me the way brothers do in stories. But he didn't. He just looked at me like he wanted to apologize without words, and that almost hurt more. Because I realized he was right not to speak. If he had, it would have turned into another lecture about respect, about not taking jokes so seriously, about how I need to lighten up. Dad's laughter carried weight in that room, and no one challenged it. So I didn't speak either. I did what I always did, smiled. A small, practiced, tight-lipped smile. I let the laughter fade, let the conversation move on, let dessert arrive. From the outside, it probably looked like I'd taken the joke well, like I was the good sport everyone expected me to be. But inside, something twisted and refused to untie. The rest of the dinner blurred into background noise. I remember snippets. Ethan's fiancée talking about the venue, Dad joking with one of his colleagues about golf, Mom passing around the dessert plates. But all I could think about was how easily people dismissed dreams they didn't understand. To them, jewelry was a hobby. To me, it was survival. It was the hours I spent sketching designs at 2 a.m., the burn on my thumb from a soldering torch, the thrill of my first online sale. It was my independence, my quiet rebellion against the life my father had already planned for me. That night, his joke didn't just bruise, it branded. it carved something permanent beneath my ribs. I watched him laugh, confident, surrounded by people who mirrored his approval back to him. And I realized something simple but irreversible. I would never earn his respect by explaining myself. I would have to prove it. So I smiled, raised my glass with everyone else, and swallowed the bitterness like champagne. On the surface, nothing had changed. But deep down, something had cracked wide open. I carried the laughter home like a stone in my chest. The apartment smelled of metal and lemon oil, faint traces of the polishing cloth I'd run over a pendant an hour earlier, and the boxes that held my life lined the living room like quiet witnesses. Craft mailers stacked, tissue paper folded into neat squares, a spool of black satin ribbon, a crate of raw silver chain with a tiny tag on each link noting its weight. I turned the lamp on and it carved a small island of light across my workbench. Everywhere else the room held the soft city hum of tires and distant conversation. I sat down and didn't move for a long time, just let the silence catch up with me. The joke unspooled again in my head, Dad's voice loud and performative, the room's laughter like a tide. It wasn't just humiliation, it was a ledger-opening moment. Every year of not being taken seriously, every birthday with a patronizing pat on the head, every cute little hobby dropped like a verdict. I could have answered that night with words, but words would have been elastic. They'd bounce and lose weight in the next family anecdote. My father's respect was not something that could be negotiated at a table. It could only be accounted for in results. So I lit the soldering iron because action is the only thing that cuts through performance. The iron hissed awake. The tiny flame-colored coil warmed the room with the smell of heated metal. I had been making pieces for 3 years, learning how silver responds to heat, how a tiny hammer strike can change a curve, how a clasp's finish can make the difference between something that feels handmade and something that feels cheap. That craft knowledge had depth. It also had gaps in branding, in presentation, in the calculations of margins and marketing that my accounting background had once taught me, but that I'd let atrophy when I dove into the creative. I grabbed a notepad and wrote 3 words at the top of the page: respect, proof, launch. I drew a box around them and underlined respect twice. Naming was always the first hard line, names separate hobbies from businesses. Aurora line surfaced the way names do when you stop trying to force them. A half-memory of dawn light on metal, a suggestion of elegance without pretension. If I was going to ask strangers to wear something I'd made, the thing had to feel inevitable when they saw it, like it had always been waiting in their jewelry box. I said the name aloud, tasted it. It fit the aesthetic I wanted: clean serif logo, narrow spacing, a hint of gold in the palette against a white background. Then I mapped the spine of the business: product, packaging, platform, promotion. Product was the easiest. Refine the 5 best sellers, standardize dimensions, make sure every piece could be photographed without props. Packaging mattered almost as much as the piece itself. I sketched a package concept: a rigid craft box lined with black velvet, a thin card with the Aurora line story typed in a minimalist font, a handwritten thank you for the early customers. The tactile elements, the feel of the box opening, the scent of the tissue paper, the untying of the ribbon, those small moments are where respect begins to gather. Platform was the next decision. Etsy was the origin story I'd lived with for 2 years, but it kept me stuck in cute little hobby land, an algorithm-dependent warren where buyers arrive for bargains, not brand stories. I needed a place I controlled, a clean website with a buy flow I could optimize, an email capture I owned, a landing page that could be shared without third-party noise. I opened a browser and navigated the options like someone picking a new apartment: Shopify for control and apps, Squarespace for design simplicity, a WordPress/WooCommerce build for absolute customization. Shopify won on speed and integrations. I registered the domain --auroraline.com --, invested in a theme that offered a clean hero image with a simple product carousel and strong typographic hierarchy. Marketing was where my accounting education became an asset rather than an exile. I sketched a customer acquisition model on a single page: cost per click limits, expected conversion rates, average order value goals that preserved a 50% margin after packaging and platform fees. I calculated how many sales I'd need in the first month to cover the web build, the inventory I'd set aside for photo shoots, and a small ad budget. I did the math until the numbers felt like a scaffold that could hold the brand up. Underneath, I left breathing room for mistakes. a contingency fund equal to 6 weeks of product costs, because craft businesses run on the unpredictable rhythm of the market. Then I wrote an outreach message and rewrote it until it stopped sounding needy. I'd been messaging an influencer, Jules Harper, a stylist with 120,000 followers, on and off for months, leaving comments that weren't meant to be sales pitches so much as conversations, noticing the photos where her jewelry rimmed her collarbones and imagining my pieces there. Now I drafted a DM, short, professional, not begging but clear about value. I included a small media kit, 3 hero shots, a short brand story that spoke to handcrafted detail and family lineage, and an offer, 2 complimentary pieces in exchange for an honest post timed to my launch. I saved the message and hit send on a test to my own email, so I could see it from a recipient's perspective. It arrived and looked tidied in the inbox, Aurora line, collaboration proposal. I felt the small, controlled satisfaction of the button click. I photographed pieces into the night using a roll of seamless paper and the window light that drifted in from the building across the street. I learned to see how shadows carved themselves into the curve of a pendant and how a model's hand posed, as if it had always belonged to the piece. I edited, cropped, and exported files labeled for product pages and separate versions for social. I wrote product descriptions that were specific, measurements, materials, the finish, and then I wrote one line of story beneath each. Inspired by early morning light on the river, hand-formed clasp, a lifetime's small, precise resistance. Those lines were the connective tissue between the craft and the customer. Financially, I tightened my belt. I tallied savings, moved a chunk into a buffer specifically for ad spend, and outlined what I could defer: fewer nights out, delayed lease improvements, minor sacrifices that kept the business alive without making it feel like a penance. The smallest sacrifices felt strategic now, not punitive. Buying fewer coffees so I could afford 1,000 business cards felt like choosing armor. Most of all, I decided on timing. I booked a quiet calendar day, Ethan's engagement party. Not out of malice, there was no joy in scheduling a reveal that would intersect with his celebration. But the date had the exact sharp symbolism I needed. I wanted a precise counterpoint to the evening of humiliation, a private proof measured in pixels, packages, and customer notes rather than applause. I set milestones in a spreadsheet. Website live 3 days before the date, influencer posts scheduled for that morning, email blast queued for noon. The spreadsheet was tidy and frighteningly real. By dawn, my soldering iron had cooled. My hands smelled like lemon oil and old metal, nails streaked with a fine gray. The apartment light softened to pale blue as the city woke. Neighbor sirens and the first bus routines filled the air. I folded up the notepad, the page dense with plans and numbers and small, actionable steps. I fetched a cup of coffee, bitter and immediate, and sat for a long minute holding it like a talisman. Inside the apartment, the boxes remained, unchanged, patient. Outside, the laughter of dinner rooms continued and choked radio snaps through the walls of my building. I felt a clarity I hadn't allowed myself before. Humiliation had been a ledger entry, and I decided how to balance the books. The next 3 months blurred together into something that didn't feel like time at all, just motion, pressure, and purpose. Morning and night stopped meaning anything. My alarm clock became irrelevant. I woke when the city lights shifted from orange to pale, when the construction workers across the street began shouting orders to one another. My apartment, once a space where I lived, became an engine, every corner filled with the pulse of my work. The kitchen counter disappeared beneath trays of pendants. The dining table became a photography station covered in light reflectors made from foil and white paper. Even my bed became a staging ground for packaging. Boxes lined up like little soldiers awaiting inspection. Every day followed the same relentless rhythm. I'd solder until my fingers trembled, polish until my eyes watered, photograph until my back screamed from leaning forward for hours. I forced myself to learn what I hadn't known: SEO optimization, conversion funnel metrics, Shopify app integrations, email drip campaigns. I read late-night marketing blogs written by people who had clawed their way from nothing, copying their tactics, then reshaping them into something that felt like mine. My hands smelled perpetually of metal and lavender oil from the polishing cloths. My laptop keys grew faintly discolored from the constant pressure of numbers, captions, and replies. Money, the one thing I'd always managed carefully, began to dissolve faster than I expected. Every dollar had a purpose: website fees, ad testing, photography gear, packaging redesigns, but no safety net. There were nights when I stared at my bank account, the balance shrinking like a slow leak, and wondered if I was just building a very expensive fantasy. But then a notification would ping on my phone. Order received. A stranger, somewhere in Ohio or Portland or Toronto, had chosen something I made with my hands. It didn't matter that the order total was $48 or $62. It was proof that the invisible bridge between my effort and the world had begun to form. When the first preview post went semi-viral, it happened at 2:17 a.m. I remember the time exactly because I just finished packing 5 sample boxes and was too tired to stand. I posted a video showing the process of shaping a pendant from raw silver, set to quiet piano music. Within hours, the comments flooded in, people asking prices, shipping details, stories about heirloom pieces their grandmothers had owned. I didn't cry because it was success. I cried because it was real. For months, I'd been working in isolation, surrounded by the constant hum of doubt and the ghost of my father's laughter. Now the silence broke. Someone saw me, and it wasn't family, it was the world. The apartment changed too. It became layered with history in real time. Small burns dotted the workbench, little circles of black where I'd been careless with heat. The walls smelled faintly of metal dust and coffee. The floor creaked beneath the weight of stacked inventory boxes labeled by collection name: Aurora Dawn, Silver Current, Horizon Line. I'd begun numbering each piece and cataloging them like museum artifacts, documenting every imperfection that made them distinct. I was no longer just making jewelry, I was building an archive of what resilience looked like. Some evenings, exhaustion caught up to me. I'd sit on the floor, surrounded by half-filled shipping envelopes, my legs stretched out over bubble wrap, and feel a hollowness that had nothing to do with hunger. The kind of emptiness that comes from pouring too much of yourself into something that doesn't yet exist in full. But every time I thought of stopping, I saw that dinner table again, the glint of glasses, the sound of laughter that had sliced through my pride. It wasn't anger that pushed me anymore, it was a steady, quiet determination. The kind that doesn't need applause or even recognition, just completion. Ethan showed up one Saturday afternoon without warning. I hadn't cleaned, hadn't showered, and looked like a disaster. Hair tied up, silver dust on my jeans, half-eaten sandwich next to the laptop. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes taking everything in. For a long time, he didn't say a word. His silence wasn't judgmental. It was observant, as if he was cataloging this world of mine the way I cataloged my pieces. Finally, he said, "You're gonna make it, Jai. You've got that fire Dad doesn't understand." I didn't respond right away. I was afraid that if I spoke, my voice would crack. So I just smiled, a kind of tired smile that feels more like surrender than confidence. But his words landed somewhere deep, right in the place where I'd been carrying doubt like a weight. Ethan had always been Dad's mirror, steady, predictable, successful in the ways that earned applause at family dinners. For him to say that, to see something in me Dad couldn't, was a kind of validation no spreadsheet or sale could match. After he left, I sat in the silence he'd left behind, surrounded by the hum of my machines, the faint smell of burnt flux, the echo of his voice. That single sentence kept replaying, like a mantra I hadn't realized I needed. Maybe Dad would never understand why someone would trade a stable paycheck for the chaos of creation, but maybe that didn't matter anymore. Maybe I didn't need him to. What Ethan didn't know was that my timeline wasn't random. Every order I shipped, every design I photographed, every line of code I adjusted on the site, all of it was leading to a date marked in bold red on my calendar. The day of his engagement party. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about overshadowing anyone. It was about alignment, turning the day that once symbolized humiliation into one that symbolized autonomy. The party would be a celebration of his future. My launch would be the quiet unveiling of mine. I didn't tell him that, though. Some things are stronger when kept secret, especially the kind of resolve that grows in silence, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it's ready. So I kept working, 12-hour days, sometimes 15. My hands blistered, my eyes stung, but the pieces multiplied. Orders trickled, then doubled, then slowed again, each fluctuation teaching me something about patience, about the unpredictable tempo of growth. I stopped measuring progress by numbers alone and started noticing subtler signs, the sharper lines of my designs, the smoother transitions in my product photography, the calm in my chest when I opened my analytics dashboard instead of fear. The world outside my apartment moved on, birthdays, holidays, office promotions, but inside these walls, time folded inward. I was building something no one could mock, no one could diminish. Every spark, every scratch, every sleepless night was a thread in that tapestry. The laughter from that dinner was fading now, not because it had lost its sting, but because its echo had been replaced by something stronger, the steady rhythm of my own making. The morning of Ethan's engagement, sunlight spilled across my apartment in golden streaks, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight of exhaustion pressing me down. There was a tension in the air, a kind of electric expectation that comes before a storm or a revelation. I dressed carefully, choosing a sleek emerald dress that swept just above the ankle, feeling the fabric cling in all the right places. I wore no jewelry save for a single piece, a delicate gold chain with a sun pendant, my own creation, polished to a warm glow. It was subtle enough to avoid drawing attention, but powerful enough to remind me of why I had worked through nights when the world slept and everyone else doubted me. The drive to the golf club was quiet. I replayed the dinner from months ago, the sharp crackle of laughter as Dad delivered his joke, the way forks had frozen midair, how the room had seemed to tilt against me. I didn't feel anger now, I felt clarity. That evening had been a spark. That spark had ignited a fire I'd fed every day since, and today the culmination of those months would speak louder than words ever could. Inside the club, the grandeur hit me all at once. Chandeliers dripped crystal rain over long tables adorned with white linens and gold accents. Waiters floated through the room with trays of champagne, and the murmur of conversations, gossipy, warm, familiar, wrapped around me. These were the same faces who had laughed at my little hobby, who had nodded at Ethan's success as though it were the only thing that mattered. I drew in a deep breath, steadying myself, feeling the heartbeat of the room synchronize with my own pulse. Ethan and his fiancée Layla stood at the center of the room, raising glasses to toast their new life. The clinking of champagne flutes created a melody that underscored the moment, a moment of joy, of union, of celebration. I smiled, genuine and calm, but beneath that smile, my fingers hovered over my phone. My thumb found the published button. And then the quiet chaos began. The first notification pinged a new order, then another. My pulse quickened as the notifications multiplied, tumbling over each other like dominoes. Within minutes, hundreds of orders poured in. My screen blinked with the glow of 1,000 small confirmations. Aurora line, sold out, shipping details updated. Thousands of likes flooded the social media post. The influencer I partnered with had posted a video wearing the sun pendant, her voice warm and sincere as she called it the most elegant brand of 2025. Comments streamed beneath. I've never seen jewelry like this. Where do I get one? This is going to be my wedding gift. My heart thumped violently in my chest, and a tear slid down my cheek, not of sadness, but of release. By the time Ethan finished his toast, by the time the room erupted into applause, Aurora Line had sold out every single item in stock. The realization hit me like a physical force. Months of work, sleepless nights, painstaking designs, and tireless marketing had culminated in this singular, quiet triumph. I didn't need anyone else to understand it. The numbers were undeniable, the impact immediate. Then Dad approached, champagne glass in hand. His smile, that familiar mixture of pride and dismissiveness, played across his features. "So," he said casually, his tone light as if he were asking about the weather, "how's the little jewelry thing?" I didn't answer immediately. I lifted my phone and turned the screen toward him. The Aurora Line dashboard glowed with life. $84,000 in sales in under 8 hours, hundreds of satisfied customers, comments praising the brand. His eyes widened, and for the first time, that carefully cultivated arrogance faltered. Around us, the room's chatter dimmed. Even the waiters paused mid-step, sensing the shift in energy. "You did this today?" His voice was quiet now, incredulous, almost breathless. "Yes," I said softly, almost whispering, letting each word carry its weight. "The same day you taught me how to stay quiet when people laugh." Dad blinked, swallowing whatever he had intended to say next. The dismissal was gone, replaced by a moment of genuine realization. I watched him adjust his stance, the first cracks forming in the armor he had always worn. A man confident in numbers but blind to persistence and vision until now. From across the room, Ethan caught my eye. His smile was quiet but unguarded. He raised a hand subtly and mouthed, "Proud of you." In that glance, I felt the full circle of months of effort, determination, and silent rebellion. It wasn't about overshadowing him or proving anything to the crowd. It was about claiming my voice in the world, building something real and unassailable from the fragments of doubt and laughter I had endured. As I watched the celebration continue, clinking glasses and laughter now mingled with whispers of amazement about Aurora Line, I realized something fundamental. Success wasn't a loud proclamation. It didn't need fanfare or permission. It was quiet, relentless, and undeniable. And tonight, beneath the grandeur and the familiar faces, it shone brightly, my triumph woven into the same evening that had once threatened to diminish me. I stayed there a while longer, feeling the rhythm of the party around me, the warmth of accomplishment settling deep into my chest. It wasn't revenge, it was reclamation, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was, and no laughter, no doubt, no dismissive comment could ever take that away. The morning after the engagement party, my phone rang before sunrise. I groaned, assuming it was a vendor or another notification about an order. But when I saw Dad's name on the screen, my chest tightened. His calls had never been casual. They were either corrections, criticisms, or demands wrapped in the guise of concern. I hesitated, then swiped. "Jada," he said, and his voice was quiet, tentative. It carried none of the booming certainty that had filled the dinner hall months ago, none of the laughter that had made me shrink in my chair. Instead, it was measured, almost fragile. "I owe you an apology." I froze. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I stayed silent, letting him continue. "I didn't see it," he admitted, as if confessing a personal failure he had carried in silence for decades. "I didn't see you." I could hear the weight behind each word. There was no defensiveness, no attempt to redirect blame. Just the raw acknowledgement that for too long he had underestimated me, and perhaps underestimated what it meant to create something from nothing. He paused, and I imagined him standing in the kitchen of his own memories, recalling a younger version of himself, a man with ambition and little patience for deviation. "Your grandfather," he continued, voice catching slightly, "he started his own business with nothing. I should have remembered that. I should have remembered the fire in our blood." Recognition. Not just an apology, recognition. For a long moment, silence stretched between us, carrying more meaning than any words could have. I didn't respond immediately. I let the pause hold the weight of everything, the laughter that had cut me, the months of tireless work, the sleepless nights, the blistered fingers, and the constant push to make my vision real. And in that silence, I felt something shift, not just in him, but in me. The validation didn't need to come from family, but it was powerful nonetheless. Over the following weeks, Aurora Line continued to grow in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. My small studio apartment transformed into a bustling workshop. I hired 2 assistants, then 3, each of them as passionate about the craft as I was. My website evolved into an experience rather than a shop. Carefully curated collections, blog posts about design inspiration, and a community space where customers shared stories about their purchases. Every sale became more than a transaction. It was affirmation that my dream was real and that it mattered. A year after that fateful dinner, Aurora Line landed a feature in Forbes. The article highlighted me as one of the most promising young female entrepreneurs of 2025, emphasizing the ingenuity behind each piece, the strategy in my branding, and the relentless dedication that had fueled growth. I spoke about perseverance, about creative vision, about market trends, but I never mentioned the laughter in that family dining room, the moment that had sparked the fire. That part of the story belonged to me alone. It was private fuel, a reminder of the journey from ridicule to recognition, from doubt to proof. When I visited home later that year, the shift in atmosphere was subtle but undeniable. Dad was waiting for me in the living room, his usual corporate crispness softened by something new. He wore one of my bracelets, a simple leather band with a gold clasp, understated but unmistakably mine. "It reminds me," he said, his voice slower now, more reflective, "that sometimes the quiet ones are just loading their cannons." I smiled, a real, unguarded smile, feeling the full weight of his words. It wasn't a metaphor thrown lightly. It was understanding, an acknowledgement of resilience that I had cultivated in silence while he and the rest of the world had laughed. There was a warmth in that moment, a mutual respect that had been absent for years. Aurora Line was no longer a cute little hobby. By now, it had become a recognizable brand, stocked in boutiques across the country, featured in fashion editorials, and embraced by clients who valued artistry as much as quality. I watched as my team thrived, as our community expanded, and as my designs became part of stories that were bigger than mine alone. I had built something tangible from years of doubt and quiet perseverance, and every customer, every compliment, every mention in media reminded me that the foundation was stronger than ridicule. Yet the personal victory lingered just beneath the surface. It wasn't about proving my father wrong, it was about proving to myself that persistence, skill, and quiet determination could surpass judgment and laughter. The moment of acknowledgement from Dad was symbolic, yes, but the real triumph had been internal. Every blistered finger, every sleepless night, every decision to press forward when others doubted, that was the empire I had built. And the beauty of it was that it was mine, entirely and undeniably mine. As I left the house that evening, Dad's words echoing softly in my mind, I realized something profound. Respect doesn't have to be demanded. It can be earned, quietly, deliberately, and without fanfare. And when it comes, it resonates far deeper than any laughter ever could. For the first time, I didn't just feel successful. I felt recognized, understood, and unstoppable. Aurora Line was more than a brand. It was a declaration of resilience, and in that, I finally felt fully seen.